You went to the grocery store last year and spent $100. You go back today, same items, same list, and somehow the total is $118. Nothing changed, except everything cost more. That's inflation. And most people stop there. They know prices go up. What they don't know is why, who controls it, and most importantly, who actually benefits from it. Because someone always does. Let's start with the simplest possible definition. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises over time, which means the purchasing power of your money falls. In plain English, your dollar today buys less than your dollar did 10 years ago, and it will buy less again 10 years from now. The most common way to measure it is the Consumer Price Index. Think of it as a basket of things a typical household buys: food, rent, transport, healthcare. When that basket costs more than it did a year ago, that difference is your inflation rate. If inflation is 4%, that basket costs 4% more than last year. Simple. Here's what that looks like in real life. Something that cost you $100 in the year 2000 would cost you around $190 today. A coffee your parents bought for $1 now runs $3 or $4. The coffee didn't get better. The dollar got weaker. Economists sometimes call this the silent tax because, unlike a real tax, nobody ever sends you a bill. It just quietly shows up at the register, a little more every year, until one day you look up and wonder how everything got so expensive. Now, here's where most explanations stop being plain and start being complicated. Let's keep it simple. There are three main causes of inflation. First, too much money chasing too few goods. When there's more money in the system, then there are things to buy. Sellers can charge more. Classic supply and demand, just applied to money itself. Second, production costs go up. If oil gets more expensive, shipping gets more expensive. If shipping gets more expensive, everything in every store gets more expensive. This is called cost-push inflation. The cost pushes the price up. Third, expectations. This one is underrated. If workers expect prices to rise, they demand higher wages. If businesses expect higher wages, they raise prices preemptively. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Inflation can be partly psychological. In the United States, the institution responsible for keeping inflation under control is the Federal Reserve, the Fed. In the UK, it's the Bank of England. Their main tool is interest rates. And here's what that actually means for you personally. When the Fed raised rates aggressively in 2022 and 2023, mortgage rates in the U.S. went from around 3% to over 7%. Someone buying a $400,000 home suddenly faced monthly payments that were $800 higher than they would have been 2 years earlier. That's not an abstract policy decision. That's people being priced out of buying a house. That's how interest rates work in real life. They don't just affect banks, they affect your rent, your car loan, your credit card interest, your job, because when borrowing gets expensive, businesses invest less and hire less. The Fed is essentially trying to cool the economy down without freezing it completely, and they're doing it with a tool that has a significant delay. Changes in interest rates take 12 to 18 months to fully work through the economy. By the time they see the results, they may have already overshot. Here's the part that doesn't make it into the standard explanation. And it's the part worth arguing about in the comments. Inflation is not neutral. It's a tax, but one that nobody voted for, and one that hits people very differently depending on what they own. If you hold cash, inflation is your enemy. Every year your savings sit in a bank account earning 1%, while inflation runs at 4%, you lose 3% of your purchasing power. Silently, without anyone taking it from your account. It just evaporates. If you hold assets, real estate, stocks, commodities, inflation is often your friend. Those assets reprice upward. Your house isn't losing value. In nominal terms, it's gaining. This is one of the structural reasons wealth inequality tends to grow during inflationary periods. It's not because rich people are smarter. It's because the rules of inflation are written in favor of people who already own things. And here's the detail that makes people genuinely uncomfortable. Governments that carry large national debts, and most do, have a quiet incentive to allow moderate inflation. Because inflation erodes the real value of that debt over time. They borrowed dollars worth X. They repay in dollars worth less than X. The debt shrinks in real terms. Is that deliberate policy? Officially, no. But the incentive is there. And incentives matter more than intentions. Think about two neighbors. One kept $50,000 in a savings account for a decade, feeling responsible and safe. The other put the same $50,000 into a house in the stock market. After 10 years of inflation, the saver's money buys noticeably less than it used to, while the owner's assets are worth far more. They made what looked like equally sensible choices. Inflation quietly rewarded one and punished the other. Not all inflation is bad. This surprises people. Most central banks target around 2% inflation per year. Why? Because a small, predictable level of inflation encourages spending and investment. If you know your money will be worth slightly less next year, you have an incentive to do something with it today, rather than hold it indefinitely. Deflation, the opposite of inflation, where prices fall, sounds appealing but is actually dangerous. If prices are falling, people wait to buy, businesses sell less, they hire less, they pay less, demand collapses. Japan spent decades fighting this trap. So the goal isn't zero inflation. It's stable, predictable, moderate inflation. The problem is when it gets out of control, like the US in the early 1980s when it hit 14%, or more extreme cases like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where it became hyperinflation and the currency essentially became worthless. You felt a milder version of this recently. In 2022, inflation in the United States hit about 9%, the highest level in 40 years. Groceries, gas, and rent all jumped at once, and for most people, wages simply didn't keep up. That is what it feels like when inflation slips out of that comfortable middle zone, and it is exactly what central banks are terrified of. Let's land the plane. 1. Inflation means your cash loses value over time. Keeping large amounts of money sitting idle is a slow leak. 2. Assets tend to protect against inflation better than cash. Understanding this is one of the most practical things you can take from basic economics. 3. The people who control interest rates are making judgment calls, not running precise calculations. There is no perfect setting on that dial. If this raised more questions than it answered, good. That's the point. Next time someone mentions inflation on the news, you'll know what's actually being discussed. And next time, we'll tackle the one number hiding behind all of this: interest rates, the price of money that quietly controls your mortgage, your savings, and your credit card. That's the next video. Subscribe to Plain Economics. No jargon. Just plain.